Hammerheads, and in this podcast series we're focusing on the BFI's list of the great Hammer horror films for every year from 1957 to 1974. We may do some other things as well. And Hammerheads wouldn't be Hammerheads without my very good friend, film director, screenwriter, raconteur, philanthropist,
billionaire genius,
and general bon vivant. It's Miles Watts.
Thank you. And that was the voice of Marcus Wilson. We spared no expense. Thank you, Marcus. Thanks for joining us again for Hammerheads. This is episode 3. And as Marcus said, we're covering, it's a film a year for every year, the output of Hammer Studios, really, for their horror films. So, there's more than 17 Hammer horror films, but we're covering one a year based on this BFI list because we had to start somewhere. And for both of us, it's kind of a half and half, a refresh and celebration of films we love and also films we haven't seen before. And we have another special guest this week. This is a gentleman who we've known for almost as long as we've known each other. We went to school with this chap. This is Ritchie Wilkinson. Hello, Ritchie.
Hello, Miles. Hi, Marcus.
He's joining us from beside the seaside, beside the sea. Ritchie, we invited Ritchie this week because he's a filmmaker and also a script writer and film teacher. And we were just chatting about Hound of the Baskervilles, which is this week's film. And we suddenly said, hang on a minute, why don't you come on and talk about this? Because Ritchie was explaining that he really liked Conan Doyle and been in a few plays and just, when I was growing up with Ritchie, we were at school together, secondary school together. We went to see so many films together, didn't we, at Harrogate Odeon? Things like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Yep.
But things like Good Morning Vietnam and all those great late 80s films.
Absolutely. I think it was sort of anything that went through that cinema. We just went along and watched it. It was at least once a week appointment to just whatever it was. We were, avid consumers of all those things.
And actually, I remember because memories come back to you when you get older that you'd sort of forgotten about. And Ritchie, I think you and I, this is what I've remembered, you and I were sort of quite early into cosplay and role-playing games because we went to see Ghostbusters 2 in 1989, so we were about 14, 15, dressed as Ghostbusters, which these days, fine. But in those days, everyone was like, what the hell are you doing? We made our own outfits, didn't we?
Yeah. I think we drew a few looks then. It wasn't as done. But, we were just so into it that anything we could do. I remember recording radio plays with you as well back in those days, and any kind of films we could do. It was, literally anything to immerse ourselves into those worlds of the films that we were seeing on the big screen.
That's it.
We'd do it.
And this is the kind of thing that's continued for me, and then probably for all of us into our adult life, which is being creative. And writing and producing and making things. I've never ever stopped doing that, and it definitely all started with making radio. Because I think Marcus and I, as well, when we were kids back at primary school, we used to make radio plays and silly, radio shows where we'd interview each other as famous people and just pretend to be characters and things and stuff. And I think people lose that, so I'm glad that we all kept doing that and none of us grew up. So Marcus, this week I'll probably defer to you quite a lot on this because Marcus is a self-confirmed Arthur Conan Doyle fanatic. You're a fanatic. So this week's film is 1959's The Hound of the Baskervilles.
It is, and yes, I was quite late to the party with Conan Doyle, and it'd be interesting to compare your Conan Doyle experience, Ritchie, but I really was introduced to it by a friend who gave me some of the audio stories on tape, probably about 20 years ago now. But I was certainly an adult before I started getting into any of these Sherlock Holmes stories. And I was really raised on the BBC dramatizations with Clive Merrison, your mate Miles, who you
I've
see, I
seen
believe,
him
in Betty's in York.
Yeah, I've seen Clive Merrison dining out a few times and just left him alone because I thought I don't want to pester him, but good to see him there. Yeah.
And Clive Merrison and Michael, the late great Michael Williams, the late Mr. Judi Dench. He and Clive Merrison together are just, for me, just what Holmes and Watson should be. Because for me, it's, yeah, Holmes is that analytical machine, and on the other hand, you've got Watson, who is really a ladies' man, quite a charmer, but he also has PTSD because he's been in the Afghan campaigns. He's been shot as a field doctor, and he comes back to London, and he is pretty traumatized, really. But he finds Holmes, and Holmes is really just like this magician to him. And I think their relationship, I think it's often the case. It's whoever you see first, or whoever you hear first in these roles. But for me, it's Clive Merrison and Michael Williams just have that relationship, because you've got the yin and yang of Holmes and Watson, but you've also got the relationship that they have, which is kind of almost a romantic one. They're sort of like an old bickering married couple in a way. And they both see something in each other that they don't possess themselves. But then there's this additional character almost, which is Victorian London, which for me is as important as the other characters, and it is a character in the book. And for me, just reading the Holmes stories now is you're just almost like immersing yourself in that, consulting room with the smells and sounds of London, with this incredible relationship between these two guys. And it's like, it's like sitting on Fraser Eames' chair, and or it's the Golden Girl's couch. It's like being part of that family, and it's quite a reassuring thing, particularly when there's like 60, I think, stories. There's 56 short stories and 4 novels. So that's where Conan Doyle sort of sits with me. But how about you, Ritchie?
Well, I was a slightly different era. I was Jeremy Brett was my first. Now, look, watching them back, they've not quite stood the test of time as brilliantly, but it was still the gateway for me. We had a bit more of the bumbling Watson in that one, which I'm never particularly a fan of. Because, as you say quite rightly, it's that mutual respect relationship that they have. And if anything, I want a Watson to be sort of, okay, I was going to say at my level of intelligence, but probably a bit higher than that. But I want them to be a fully functional Watson, because he's our way in to understand what's going on in this sort of steel trap of Holmesian's mind. It's a sort of wonderful place to peer into, and he's our window into that. As you say, the characterization of London, but as well the sort of view on the world. Holmes is at its heart also incredibly exotic. Yes, okay, perhaps a little bit jingoistic in its representation of other cultures, and at certain times still very much reflective of its time, rather than reflective as we would want it to be in a modern era. But it's a sort of a fascinating window into that. I then got into the Basil Rathbones off the back of that. I think BBC Two were re-showing them or something. And it was at the time also I was watching King of the Rocket Men, the old Flash Gordons. So that black and white held a mystery for me, in the old Johnny Weissmuller Tarzans. And so, seeing Basil Rathbone back then playing in this sort of similar, all sitting in a similar melting pot for me, it gave me a real sort of enjoyment of that. Yeah. And then later on, discovering the rest of the canon of the books through audiobooks, various readers. But when I was younger, obviously, those of you who can't see me, I'm absolutely racing thin and perfectly fit. But I used to run a little bit when I was younger.
Yes.
And and I would have them on podcasts. I remember I did a marathon once, and the entire way round, I was listening to Conan Doyle's books of Sherlock Holmes. And it was amazing. It took my mind off it completely.
That's amazing.
That's good. I don't think there's that kind of particularly motivational listening while you're doing a marathon, but
well, it made the time pass. It made the time pass because you were thinking, where are we going next? What's the, how is this going to resolve?
And then you found yourself on a moor in the middle of nowhere and sinking in a mire and going, hang on, something's gone wrong. Where's my GPS?
Was it the London Marathon? Were you going down Baker Street?
It was the London, and no, I fortunately I didn't manage that badly a wrong turn. Also I got into for a little while that they can be quite hard listening. There was sort of I think it must have been late 1920s American radio play. That was, I mean, it was very melodramatic. I mean, there was more sort of Wurlitzer organ in that than you could shake a stick at. But they sort of quite freely adapted the stories, and some of the short stories maybe didn't quite stand the treatment they got, but they got it anyway. But great fun.
I think my experience is slightly more highbrow than either of you two gentlemen, because my experience of you're waiting for this, Marcus, aren't you? You can tell. You're like, here comes a joke, but no, it's serious. Basil the Great Mouse Detective, the animated film, I think was the first thing I saw when I was about 11. Basil the Great Mouse Detective, and that also, you know, I knew about Sherlock Holmes, and so I enjoyed that film. So then I realized he was named after Basil Rathbone. My dad had a load of Basil Rathbone. Sherlock Holmes is on TV and possibly radio. He used to always be playing something on radio that seemed to be about Sherlock Holmes or Paul Conrad or one of those detective series, you know. So yeah, for me, Basil Rathbone was Sherlock Holmes for a long, long time. And then I liked some of the weird takes on it, the comedy takes on it, like Without a Clue with Michael Caine I think he plays a bumbling Sherlock Holmes, and Watson is the genius. I think is it Michael Caine and Ben Kingsley is Watson, and also The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes' Younger Brother, which is the Gene Wilder movie, which, funnily enough, also has John Le Mesurier in it.
Oh yeah.
Who's in House? No, he's not in House of Frankenstein, because that's not anything to do with what we're talking about. He's in the Hound of the Baskervilles. So I had this weird patchwork way in, and then I actually really did enjoy. I think you did, Marcus, as well, the Robert Downey Jr. ones.
Yeah, I thought they were great. And of course, when we grew up on Danger Mouse as well, which is very much a nod to Holmes and Watson.
That's the first one then. Danger Mouse. There you go. See, I was joking about Basil the Great Mouse Detective, but it was Danger Mouse all along. I used to love Danger Mouse. Just some of David Jason and Terry Scott, and of course. In fact, I nearly sent you something today, Marcus, but you probably saw Ma Harris tweeted it, and it was if you look, she posted something today, and it's a blue plaque on the bottom of a post box in London. It says Danger Mouse, great detective lives here. I'm like, I hope that's real. I hope someone put that on. so that's good. We all had a different sort of way in, really. I mean, my way into these things is always through this patchwork of pop culture,
and obviously so many comedic pastiches of Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I sent you the other day, Miles, didn't I? The Dudley Moore and
yes,
Peter Cook.
Oh God, that was funny.
Where
who did it? Who did it?
Dr. Watson insists that Holmes goes for a country retreat, a break, and you see Dudley Moore fishing on the side of a river, sitting on a big metal box of cocaine, while Sherlock Holmes is sort of shadow boxing with his music stand while frantically playing violin. And the violin, Watson, who bloody did it? Who bloody did it?
Who bloody did it? I know. So, but I love how po-faced Dudley is when he's playing Watson. It's very like he really respects Holmes, even though Holmes is clearly mad in the background. That, and also I thought a notable mention for Mitchell and Webb.
If you're going to go with Sherlock Gnomes, that might be a problem.
I haven't seen it. If I had, I probably would have mentioned it by this point. But it's the Mitchell and Webb Sherlock retirement home, which, you know, obviously starts out funny, and then at the end he's just going, I can't remember, John, I can't remember, and Watson's crying, and that was the end of Mitchell and Webb show. We were like, wow, that's really poignant. He said, oh, it's so foggy, I can't remember.
Well, it's similar, taken a bit more seriously. The BBC film recently, Mr. Holmes.
Oh yeah,
with Ian McKellen. taken a similar take. What happens when he starts to lose that greatest faculty he's got? Does he miss what he had to surrender to achieve that?
Yeah, and of course, Batman is based on Sherlock Holmes. Batman is meant to be the greatest detective ever, but he's 100%. I mean, you only really find this out if you've watched the movies recently, because the Batman, he actually does some detective work in it, whereas the others, he just sort of hits people. I mean, they're great. All the Batman films are great to one degree or another, apart from the obvious ones from the 90s, which we were mentioned. But yeah, Sherlock Holmes and House MD as well. Obviously, House has been it's named after Holmes, but it's that absolute the maddening nature of him. And then obviously Cumberbatch played him very, very memorably. I don't think you're a huge fan, Marcus, of that series, were you?
I think this goes back to my belief that Holmes is about Victorian London, is one of the characters for me, and if you take that out, and actually if you introduce like cell phones and email and things like that, it sort of takes some of the magic out of what's. And I can't say that I've sat down and really watched them and given them a proper hearing, because I'm sort of like, I'm kind of like, don't.
You're a purist.
If it's not Sherlock Holmes, don't call it Sherlock Holmes. Like, if it's not James Bond, like, don't call it James Bond.
I think you might enjoy one episode. They did a Christmas special, and it's set in Victorian times, and it's done in that style. And you think, okay, well, why are they doing this? And you realize it's Sherlock's way of coming up with a solution to a crime that links to a Victorian crime that he read about. And he's putting himself in there, imagining that him and Holmes are in Victorian London. And it's quite cleverly done. It's very Stephen Moffat, and Mark Gatiss, but Stephen Moffat's, he's so clever. Sometimes he's too clever. He goes around the back and becomes bafflingly so, and then clever again. He out clevers himself sometimes, but that is a good one. But yes, so
I think I'm flying the face of other Holmes fans that I do love Cumberbatch's
me too.
Take on it. I think yes, okay, it does. You have to surrender that Victorian London, but I think they capture the sort of insular mystery of it without, because my current treatment that I'm pushing through at the moment, trying to get made, is actually a version of Hound of the Baskervilles, but it is modernized for the modern age so much that it's designed to be viewed on an iPhone in vertical aspect ratio. The whole thing is being aimed at very much unashamedly at a teenage audience.
Yeah,
and it's that understanding of what would Holmes have been like had he, or in my case she, had all that technology available to them.
That's very clever. I think that's a very clever framing device, I thought, when I read the script, and I really liked the dialogue and the characters and the relationships and stuff. And I thought, I think that would be the next natural step if someone like Moffat was doing it. They'd be like, okay, how do we get this bang up to date? Right, vertical on an iPhone.
Yeah, I love the idea that the medium is part of that, and it speaks to what you're trying to do there. Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. But I will accept for you to hate it, Marcus, because it is absolutely sort of skewing that. But the problem is Miles, sort of almost better than most, recreating Victorian London is
never tried it.
Kind of costly. Yeah,
I've never tried it. I can't even recreate Victorian London in my mind, so let alone on screen. I'd say, I don't know. Again, I'd go to Danger Mouse, where he's standing on the edge of old London town. Danger Mouse muses. And there'd be fog everywhere,
So we should place Hound of the Baskervilles within the context of the Doyle canon then, because it sort of sits almost bang in the middle of the books around 1901, 1902 that it's serialized in the Strand magazine. Now I don't think that Hound of the Baskervilles is one of Conan Doyle's best stories. Certainly out of the 4 novels, there are novels that I prefer. I'm not even sure if it's my favourite Holmes story with a dog in it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I felt like that. It's more like, because I'm a big fan of Agatha Christie, so I love Miss Marple particularly. And the least favourite of mine are the ones where they break with the formula. And so Hound of the Baskervilles, they just break with the formula, even though it's good and it's got mystery and it's got intrigue and deductions and stuff. It's like when Miss Marple goes to the Caribbean, you're like, nah,
Yeah. Well, maybe
Yeah.
that is it for me. I mean, I was trying to work out why it was such a popular book, and I mean, it was at the height of Doyle's fame, and it is much more whodunity than most Holmes tales. And certainly,
Scooby-Doo.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people think of Holmes as being quite whodunity, but actually most of the stories are, short stories. So you don't get the luxury of throwing in lots of red herrings or really plotting it out so that the reader is thrown off the scent. But in the novels, he can do that. So this feels a lot more like a whodunit, which I guess was I think there were some more kind of whodunit type stories coming through, but also because it's long, it has the luxury of us being with Watson for a lot longer. And I think, as Ritchie said, he is the sympathetic character. You see Holmes, and Holmes becomes sympathetic through the eyes of Watson. So that is nice to be able to sort of. I mean, and actually, Holmes isn't in half the novel. He sends Watson off to look after Sir Henry and disappears for half the novel.
He disappears for half the movie as well, doesn't he?
Well, I felt this one actually had him in more than many of the other adaptations I've seen.
It did. And I think the other thing is that this novel, there's this thing that, of course, Holmes always says, "Elementary, my dear Watson," but I don't think he ever says that verbatim in the novel.
No.
But in this novel, Hound of the Baskervilles, he does say both things quite close to each other. He says, "Elementary Watson, this is a child's play of deduction," and then he goes on to say something else, "My dear Watson." So these things have sort of been, I think, brought together from this novel and are now seen as, and maybe it was even in one of the earlier Basil Rathbone films. I don't know. Does Basil Rathbone say that catchphrase?
I seem to remember he does say it. I know Cushing says it twice in this one. But I think by this point, 1959, it was like, we've got to tick those boxes. We've got to have. He's got to have his deer stalker. He's got to have his special coat with the shoulder protectors. He's got to have his pipe. He's got to say "Elementary, my dear Watson." So there's lots of. I think in this film you needed it as well. I think if you didn't have that Sherlock Holmes-ness, it would feel like it's so, like you say, it's so different to the rest of the Sherlock stories. It is more of a mystery, so I think you need to have. But I think they did it very well. They do Sherlock Holmes, the character, very well in this film. Obviously, Cushing is playing a different character than he has in the last two Hammer films we've reviewed, but he plays him he makes him infuriating. To watch. He's infuriating when he disappears, and then when he reappears, everyone's like, "Where the devil have you been?" And everyone's annoyed with him. And he does that twice in the movie, like, "We thought you were dead." And he's like, "No, I just went out the other exit." So he is Holmes. He is frustratingly, but you only get a little bit of him at home in this one, don't you?
He is very good, isn't he? When we see them first in his consulting room, I felt that was very much like the kind of Gothic boudoir. It wasn't how I envisaged their consulting room at all. It's a lot more austere in my mind, but Hammer are obviously hamming it all up by this point as well.
Well, they had those brilliant sets, didn't they? And they wanted to, because I noticed when they get to Baskerville Hall, it's like, now is this the same staircase from Dracula?
It is. Yes. It's exactly the same set.
It's the same
slightly
set.
Redressed. It is.
Very nice though. Again, I could quite happily live in it. And I think I noticed they had, didn't they have, like, as in the book, doesn't Holmes he gets a knife and he stabs his latest sort of case to the mantelpiece.
To the mantelpiece.
Just to remind him that's what I'm doing, which is very dramatic and stuff. And he does, and that's there in the beginning of this film. There's a sort of manuscript stabbed on them.
That's a Cushing influence, because Cushing was a big fan. Usually in these things, it's Christopher Lee who's the literary scholar. I mean, one only needs to look at anything like Lord of the Rings to see how literary Christopher Lee is.
Yes.
But in this one, Cushing was the big fan and insisted that it was jackknifed into the mantelpiece.
I love that, and I love the difference between them. This, because obviously the last two movies we've reviewed on this have had Christopher Lee as, first of all, Frankenstein's monster, and secondly, who just went "Ugh!" and secondly as Dracula. So in this one, there's a really nice moment in the beginning where he's arguing with what he thinks is the hotel manager for stealing his shoes, which turns out to be a clue. And then he just, when he comes out, he's like, "Oh, I'm so embarrassed." And then when the spider's on his shoulder and he manages to get, Christopher Lee's terrified of the of the spider. And then there's that brilliant line from Peter Cushing where he says something like, evil takes many forms. I thought it's really nice of Peter Cushing to be telling. So Van Helsing is telling Dracula, evil takes many forms. I just really love that.
The tarantula's nowhere in Conan Doyle, is it? That's just completely for screen.
That might be something like a Christie influence, because in Death on the Nile, someone puts a snake in Poirot's cabin.
I think this is it. Those
him.
kind of films by this time, 1959, were expected to have certain, one of the things that it would have would be some kind of creepy or crawly thing that would be poisonous.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was a device that Conan Doyle had used in, was it Speckled Necklace?
Speckled Band, yeah.
Speckled Band. There we go.
Right.
I'm spouting your superior knowledge on that one, definitely. But so it is kind of that sort of Victorian, fear of the new creatures. And when your main creature is, of course, a hellhound.
Yes.
The leagues of nature fighting against you. It sort of felt right, even if what we know now about spiders.
Yes, we know. You see a tarantula, you now know they're not poisonous to people unless you really, really piss them off. I mean, we've seen them crawling over Alfred Molina's back in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and we're like, he was like, I didn't enjoy it, but as long as I stood still, I was fine. I think actually he said no, they left their spines on me, and they were really itchy, and you're like, oh, little spines they have in their legs.
So Christopher Lee is Sir Henry Baskerville, and it really struck me that he has more than a passing resemblance to Jimmy Stewart in this film, I thought.
Yes, I thought that. And Peter Cushing has a bit of a passing resemblance to Christopher Plummer in this film, I thought. Yes, they do. Yeah, but I thought he's very he's very Jimmy Stewart because he's tall and gangly and very imposing. He is like him. Yeah, and tweed, lots of tweed.
Lots of tweed.
You can almost see that sort of romantic matinee idol male lead in him.
Definitely.
So I think it could have gone that way. I mean, flashing the book of Christopher Lee's autobiography. Which,
we have to get into this, don't we?
It was very kind of him when he did sort of scribe it to me in a meeting with him. And I think he sort of also thought that but for the grace, he could have gone down that route. Down the sort of matinee idol roles.
Tell us about the time you met Christopher Lee, please. And tell us now.
Did I mention that? No.
I would have a T-shirt saying I met Christopher Lee if I'm.
Let me just pick up that name I dropped.
Yes.
I was working on a TV show. In my former life, I worked in television for many, many years. And I was working on a TV show, and he was a guest on the show. And he was there to plug his book. His album, which was very interesting. Hearing him singing "I Was Born Under a Wandering Star," which frankly was slightly lower than Barry White. And it was also around about the time he was just sort of beating up for Count Dooku.
Yes.
And so he was on as a guest to talk about that. And of course, Lord of the Rings was already, I think, just starting to be planned, but I don't think he was allowed to talk about that at the time.
Yeah.
And went on to the interview, and the two hosts, all they did was talk to him about playing Dracula.
Of course.
Because, of course, that's what you do with him. Yes. And he was in a raging fury when he came off. I mean, not in a thumping the walls or anything. He wasn't. No. He never struck me as being that kind of person. But he was quite vocal. When you've got someone who... He's a tall man, even at that age. He's taller than me. And he was sort of saying, not happy. I played that vampire about 3 or 4 times, just going on about it.
Yeah.
He didn't want to correct to say, actually, it's more like 5 or 6. But anyway, we'll move on.
Imagine if you had. Actually, Christopher.
But I just previously, I'd written one of my dissertations on the Hammer films. And so I said to him, actually, look, I've been dying to know, because obviously it's the frustrated director in me, what was Terence Fisher like to work with? Yeah. How did he work with you as a performer? And he's like, no one's asked me that in a long time.
Oh, wow.
I said, okay, great. So he invited me to his dressing room. I was floor managing on this show. So it was sort of a quick radio through to my runner and say, Alex, you take over. I'm literally disappearing.
Screw this. I'm off to talk to Christopher Lee.
It was basically that. So he invited me to his dressing room, and then we went out for lunch afterwards.
Whoa.
And it was, his whole life story, because of course, the link with him playing Scaramanga was that he was Ian Fleming's cousin, being the son of a deposed Italian countess. Yes. And it was coming back. I don't want to cover too much ground. I know you've already covered in previous ones with him.
Continue.
But of course, him also being probably the model for Bond.
Yes,
because he was in Polski's Private Army, and he was one of the first people to. He didn't actually, I don't think he actually trained as a Royal Marine, but he was one of the first to sort of start the Royal Marine training, which were then the commandos were formed by Ian Fleming when he was working at the War Office. So there's all these sort of ties and links, and sadly, Fleming never getting to see Lee play Bond.
Yeah,
which is what he always wanted. And then even then, when they made Lee the villain in a Bond film, Fleming died before the film was released. But there were always those ties. But you see, he lived this huge, long life prior to going into these films, and then falling into the Hammer films. There's interesting to talk about Holmes and Watson. Lee and Cushing had this sort of same kind of relationship. They were, not dissimilar backgrounds, but Cushing from, not far from me up in North Kent. And, Lee having this great big sort of worldly upbringing, spending part of his youth in Africa and things. But they got together and they made this amazing friendship. I think that really carries on the screen, even when they're playing enemies. They really carry. And Lee was incredibly proud of every performance he did. He gave his all into it, and occasionally he hates the film. Yeah, but he was proud of the beat up he did to get into that part.
Well, that's it. It's like the Carry On lot. The Carry On cast apparently were, all the time. Oh yeah, another piece of shit. Kenneth Williams used to say, another crappy film, but hey ho, it's a bit of money. And I don't think it was quite that bad for Lee and Cushing. But when you look at it, it's weird. Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee starred in so many films that weren't Dracula. So, I can imagine him getting very annoyed, because obviously after all the Hammer films, he starts popping up in things like The Wicker Man, which is one of the best films ever made, let's just say. And then there was a big break and he wasn't in much in the 80s. And then he came back in, I think, Sleepy Hollow in 99. And then suddenly he was in Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. So he had another renaissance, didn't he? He had another resurgence in his older age.
I think Hammer seemed to go very out of fashion for a long time, didn't it?
It did. Yeah. It did.
Well, there were less, for want of a better word, hammy films coming up. Polanski's Repulsion, and suddenly all these slasher movies in the 70s and then the 80s. It was they were very unfashionable, and I don't think they were gory enough or scary enough, but obviously people love them. Now you can look at them and go, it doesn't matter that they're not the goriest or the scariest. They are Hammer films, and they are of a certain style, and nothing else is really like that.
They looking back, they look very British, kind of quite English. The American slasher films, I guess, of the 70s sort of superseded all of this and washed it all to one side, the Hammer stuff. But a lot of this, the film, much more so than the book, is talking about class and the British kind of class system. You start off with a very terrifying Sir Hugo Baskerville, played by this David Oxley, who I haven't seen much of his stuff, but he gives an incredible performance. Like really.
Oh yeah, the scene at the beginning with the Tory Party conference. Yeah,
that's right. It's the Bullingdon Club,
where they throw a guy through a window into a moat and then throw him in the fire and burn him to death. And then they go, just good old Bullingdon Club stuff.
What a villain.
Yeah.
And then throughout the film, there is this sort of notions about class, and obviously Christopher Lee mistakes Watson and Holmes for the hotel porter and treats them accordingly when they come through the door, and there is obviously this inheritance that the Stapletons are looking at, the illegitimate son of the lineage, and
but his willingness to love Cecile sees that he's willing to sort of cross those as a character. He's still willing to cross those borders for love. There's still this sort of underlying that love can conquer, albeit maybe doesn't quite work out the way he thought it would.
No, he didn't quite realize who she was when he was she's great in it. She gives such a spiky performance, doesn't she?
When it starts off, I think her first scene, she essentially doesn't say anything, and Watson sees her on the moor, and she runs
sitting
off,
on a
and
rock.
you think, oh god, it's going to be one of these awful kind of two-dimensional
siren characters.
It's sort of that gypsy dress as well, isn't it? Which is so typical of the horror of that era. Although saying horror, of course, this question is, the Hound of the Baskervilles actually a horror?
Yeah, it's not really, is it?
Hammer, I think, felt slightly pushed into making it more horrific, because by now horror sold.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So they needed to throw Kensington Gore at the whole thing and spray it up the walls. When in fact, it's not necessarily as horrific.
No, it's not. It's more like a sort of chamber piece, isn't it? It's more like it's quite stagey, and it's quite slow, and there's a slow build. It has a really nice payoff, and it has really nice scenes. It's got nice set pieces. I really like that. Obviously, the sets are amazing, and the mine car crash cave-in scene is a great set piece. The mire is a great set piece. They use it a couple of times.
I mean, it's weird in a way that they don't use the most cinematic element from the book, which is obviously the glowing dog with the phosphorescent coat, and they just don't do that.
I was waiting for that. I was like, they did the whole thing with the candle light out on the thing, and is there light out on the moor? And but the glowing red eyes and stuff. And actually, a film it reminded me a lot of that was influenced by it is America Werewolf in London, because they say several times, keep clear at moors. Don't wander off the path, keep clear at moors, beware, but don't say beware the moon.
This screenplay, I believe, was written by Peter Bryan, and he joined Hammer initially as a camera operator. And it wasn't until the sort of 50s that they allowed him to start writing any scripts for Hammer. So he actually makes a really good job of it, because it's pretty faithful to the original, but it does bring out this sort of the kind of class tensions, but also the sort of the sexual tensions between the classes as well, with the Marla Landy, I think, is Cecile Stapleton in kind of quite hysterical performance at times. But actually kind of quite interesting the way that Sir Henry Baskerville's behaviour, you can see parallels with Sir Hugo's entitlement from back in the day as well, that there is this sort of lineage of sort of slight sex pestery and male entitlement that runs through the film.
It reminded me of that poem, they lynch those who steal the goose from off the common, that thing, which is about the upper classes getting away with, it's very, I would say, relevant to now, but it's always relevant. The ruling classes stealing things that they want, but then berating the lower classes for stealing things, even though they've had their land taken away by the land barons and stuff. So there was that whole thing going on,
and that's been a rich vein for horror ever since, really. I mean,
it has. It's got some very interesting themes running through it. It's quite sparse, isn't it? It's like Holmes pops up, he does his Holmesy stuff, smokes his pipe, says some funny stuff, but really it's this kind of sustained, it's like some films, they're up and down. This one is sustained. It starts here, it goes there, it goes there, it goes there, and it ends there. It's got a nice satisfying payoff, but it's got these carefully woven themes, whereas Dracula is shock, sex, violence, blood. This is not like those films at all. It's not like the first two we've reviewed, Frankenstein and Dracula. It's almost like an odd duck, isn't it?
It is, but it's got those. It's got that direct linear linkage. So the fact that they're all Terence Fisher films. They Jack Asher doing all the cinematography for all of them. It gives it that similar look. He was sort of one of two principal cinematographers for Hammer, but he was the one that sort of favoured that slightly more garish, pump up the chroma a little bit more and make it just a little bit more bare in your face. Yes. And that sort of gives it that tie. And of course, Bernard Robinson's design, as we've already said, reusing some of those sets that I think played out brilliantly. And of course, the music. James Bernard doing, albeit there's not as much in this one, I don't think.
No, I like the bursts of music, though. It was nice. It reminded me a lot of... what does it remind me of? It reminded me of a couple of other films from the 50s. I've been going on a bit of a 50s binge the last couple of months, where I just can't get enough of 50s movies. Everything from Cold War paranoia to it's atomic age paranoia, really, isn't it? And giant ants and body snatchers and all that kind of thing. And this does belong in that sort of era, although this is what we're doing in England.
And it looks beautiful. Yeah, it looks beautiful as well. And actually, compared to the last two films we've looked at, its scope is quite wide in terms of they have a lot more sets than they usually do. They have a lot more outdoors sequences. They obviously want to use their half tumble down abbey, which is probably something they were shooting something else on at the time.
It's got to be, isn't it? I thought there was a really nice mix. Obviously, you can tell as soon as they're on the set, because you can tell there's a backdrop and there's fake rocks and everything, and it just the lighting changes and everything. But there were some nice shots of them running up the hill towards the ruin with the arches, and then down the other side into the set. I've always quite enjoyed that in movies because, part of you goes, "Oh, it's a set," but I appreciate a set. So it's maybe, these days films go first, they try to go for hyper-realism. But in those days, it's not like they were trying to suggest that this wasn't a set. And they were just trying to put you into a scenario,
And we should say that this was the first adaptation of the novel to be filmed in colour as well. And we're sort of 20 years beyond the Basil Rathbone black and white adaptations, and obviously about 60 years beyond the novel itself. So... social mores have come on a bit, so they can talk about things in a bit more frankly than Conan Doyle could. Although I'm sure Conan Doyle probably was quite shocking in his time as well. But they're able to explore more of these things.
Victorians were shocked by everything, weren't they?
Table legs.
Yes. The shine on that table leg is way too polished.
That exterior location. Which I did have to check this because I thought, oh my gosh, is that like a huge sunken soundstage? But it wasn't. It's a place called Frensham Ponds, which is in Surrey in the UK.
Yeah.
And so many films have been shot at Frensham Ponds. I don't know if you've got The Reptile on your list of Hammer films to come to, but you really should have. It's a few years later. We're into the 60s before we get to The Reptile, but also films like The Mummy, the recent version, and The Witcher even shot some things at Frensham Pond. So I mean, I'm going to have to now visit because it may be this ideal location. It may look that fatal.
It might do. I want to go. I really want to go there.
Well, we should give credit to Andre Morel as well as Dr. Watson because
he's great, isn't he?
I think he really pushes the character of Watson forward. Well, certainly a lot since the Nigel Bruce kind of buffoon, comical buffoon kind of playing of him. And I think that Andre Morel, he's quite a serious stage actor, and he wanted to take Watson back closer to the depiction of Watson in the books. And he actually reminded me a bit of David Burke, who was the first Watson in the Granada TV serial. Ritchie, you'll probably remember. I thought he was far the best Watson. I much preferred him to Edward Hardwicke, actually, who came after.
He was a terrific Watson, and then the fact that he kind of carries the movie, because obviously you've introduced Holmes, it's Peter Cushing, we all love Peter Cushing, but he disappears for 40 minutes and then pops up and goes, "Oh, I've been here for ages," and Watson's like, "Confounded Holmes," and you're like, "Yeah, come on, get with it." And then he's great, and so is John Le Mesurier. And I thought it was John Le Mesurier, but someone told me recently it's John Le Mesurier. So I'm like, Mesurier, okay, whatever.
Oh,
However,
I've been saying it wrong the whole time. I
So
will
have
now
I.
not say it for the rest of this.
John Le Mesurier, or Mesurier, I mean, it's French, isn't it? So
Let's start again.
John Le Mesurier, who is in fact, to everybody, the voice of the cartoon show Bod. Here comes Bod. I mean,
and Dad's Army,
Wilson and Dad's Army. But I mean, he has one of the best voices ever. Him and Arthur Lowe, who did the Mr. Men cartoons. Let's just completely degrade both of them by talking about the kids. He's
I'm
one of those voices.
They'd want to be remembered for those things.
Of course they would. They had beautiful voices. I mean, like Joss Ackland as well. Joss Ackland, he's got his voice is like drinking hot chocolate. It's like, he used to do the voiceover for Rolo adverts. Do you love anyone enough to give them your last run? And then he would say, soft, creamy toffee in a milk chocolate cup. And I'd be like, oh my God, I want that. And it's because Joss Ackland's voice was so beautiful. But John Le Mesurier's voice is just something else. It's like he's got one of those voices where he's blessed with an amazing voice. So he's an interesting character. Well, he's not, I don't know if he's an interesting character. He's quite a good presence in the film.
I think he's that perfect red herring. Sorry,
yes,
spoiler alert.
Yes, spoiler alert. Watch the film first.
The Barrymores, I may give a couple of spoilers, so please cut them out if it's inappropriate. But you have had about 70 years to watch it.
That's what I always say. I'm like, there's a statute of limitations, isn't there? Yeah.
But the Barrymores are a wonderful sort of red herring couple to have.
Yes, they are. Yes, especially the wife, because
quite a tragic couple, aren't they? Yeah.
But yeah, they're an interesting couple. But I love the fact that the wife just kind of goes red and walks out at the beginning. She drops a glass and walks out, and he's like, "I must apologize for my wife."
No, you must get her back to clean that up.
Yeah, get her back in the room. Yeah, pick that up.
That class struggle as well, doesn't it? They're the working class sort of
yes.
Ever faithful, the presentable face of the working class, as far as it's concerned, and it's sort of looking at it now, it's like, that's they've literally given their life to servitude.
Yeah, they're just carrying a tray of drinks all the time. It's like, aren't you his guest? You're his guest, and you seem to be carrying a tray of drinks all the time. That you're not really a guest. You're serving him. But also, I thought it was just good the way Cushing portrayed Holmes as this sort of impish character. He was almost like Puck. He was a troublemaker who knew everything, and everyone had. And that's Holmes has been portrayed as pompous or infuriating, insufferable, difficult, impenetrable. But in the end, Watson's always like, Holmes, you're a genius, and he's like, yeah, whatever. But I thought Cushing played him as quite interesting, almost the classic idea of Sherlock Holmes, didn't he?
Yeah, he's particularly prickly. Particularly at the end when he's to make a point or try and get Sir Henry to do something, he accuses him of going not. He doesn't like that he's hanging around with his peasant friends. And
I know. Yeah, that's a very provocative thing to say, isn't it? And Christopher Lee suddenly goes, "May I remind you that you're a guest in this house?" And you're like, "Ooh, he's pissed him off," on purpose to get a rise out of him. But it's great the fact that Christopher Lee, Baskerville, he starts the film by insulting the help, and then you realize he's that kind of person. So then, obviously, when he tries to seduce the girl, it's like, he's a bit of a bounder. So he's not someone that you don't spend the movie liking Baskerville. You think he's a bit of a prick, but
a little bit entitled.
Yes, a bit entitled.
The characters are quite three-dimensional, which I like. It's certainly a development of the Holmes-Watson relationship from Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce. I think Holmes is still maybe a little prickly for me at times, but
he's a little prickly, but it's more playful, I guess. So Basil Rathbone's, it's got very buttoned up and very serious and lovely nose, and he's very, very like post-Victorian, I guess. Whereas Cushing was very. I mean, Cushing in this reminds me of. He's got the similar voice he used for Governor Tarkin in Star Wars, because he said, there's a few times where I expected him to say, "We will deal with your rebel friends soon enough." He does that brilliant R roll. He has that sort of, there's just a sort of puckish voice. So again, he was very interesting, having played Van Helsing and Frankenstein in the last two movies we watched. So
quite. The thing that I think has often bothered me about some portrayals of Holmes is that he ends up almost being like a sonic screwdriver.
Ha, yes.
You know, it's like, oh God, we need to get past this. Well, quickly make Holmes work something out.
Yes.
And at his best, that's not how he's used. You know, he sees through the veil of human lie, this illusion, this lie we all tell ourselves. He's able to sort of peel the layers of that onion away. But of course, now so often in portrayals, you see him as, and why Hound maybe sometimes works a bit better because he's not there. It's not, you get there and the crime's solved because you spotted a missing painting. Spoiler alert.
That's true. That's true. That's the bit where I thought, he's doing a Holmes thing. There's a missing painting. And yeah, that was the most Holmesy bit, wasn't he? He's like, and then he said, well, the painting's been removed. And he goes, yes, of course it has. And you're like, well, why? Who did it? Tell me who did it. And then the bit with the shoe at the end, I love. It's a little Scooby-Doo unveil, isn't it? It's like, oh yeah, here's your missing shoe. They needed something with your scent on it. Oh, and it's a mask on a dog that's starving. Solved. Right, let's go home for tea. And then do go home for tea. It's like cucumber sandwiches and tea with Watson at the end, which is, it's almost like that bit in Curse of Frankenstein where he's fighting with that maid, and then the next scene he's just taking tea.
That's right.
So it is very quintessentially English in a lot of ways, but it's not in a sort of laughable way. I didn't think it was cheesy. I thought it was just nicely done.
I thought they made a good job of the screenplay, and some good acting going on.
I thought so. It was a very handsome production. Peter Cushing's cheekbones, though, wow, they're
amazing.
incredible. I thought I had good cheekbones, but Peter Cushing he's got incredible cheekbones.
Well, he commented on those actually in an interview I read with him. The cheekbones were even better than they should have been because he'd just been on holiday to Spain with his wife, who he adored. I mean, you know, Peter Cushing lived for one thing, and that was for his wife, for Margaret, I think it was. But and they've been on holiday, and he'd caught dysentery.
Oh,
so he came back having
sallow.
had dysentery, and you know you could sharpen pencils on those cheeks.
Oh, poor bugger! He had dysentery then, and then he had to go make a film.
And he can't stand smoking a pipe.
Right.
So every time he was smoking a pipe, he was retching.
I could kind of tell. He was kind of going, yes, he wanted to go, you know, but he did it very well. I think again, it felt like in a different way to Curse of Frankenstein, where he's this genius. This mad genius. You get the sense that Holmes he's not mad, he's very eccentric, and you believed that Peter Cushing had all the answers and was working out, like Columbo, because Columbo is obviously based on Holmes, and Columbo seems crazy and seems shambolic, and everyone just thinks he's annoying. And same with Poirot, everyone thinks he's just this annoying, pesky man, but really it's misdirection. And he's working it all out, and he's working it all out loud, and he's trying to get you to say things and give off, you know, facial tells and stuff. And I thought Cushing did a great job of that. So, yeah.
So in Columbo, of course, more like Conan Doyle's, Holmes smoked a cigar, which is what Holmes should smoke. It was only in the Marcus, you probably remember better than I. The artist who drew him in the Strand.
Oh God, yes,
Paget.
Paget,
and that who is also the one who's responsible for the Deerstalker,
right?
Because Paget himself owned a Deerstalker. It's not mentioned in the books. Holmes, if anything, I think there is a hat mentioned at one point of a top hat. But the Deerstalker came from, I think it was one illustration in the Strand that Paget did, who was a wearer of Deerstalkers.
That's really interesting. I know the Deerstalker is mentioned in one episode of the Cumberbatch thing. I think in a few episodes, because he just grabs the hat on his way out. I think it's series 2, and he's like, "Oh, the paparazzi are outside." Just grabs this hat, and he walks out. And suddenly, Sherlock, because everyone is like, "Why are there pictures of me with that ridiculous hat on? Am I going to become famous?" So they kind of dealt with that in an amusing, very Stephen Moffat kind of way.
It's great because Sherlock Holmes never dies. He's reborn as a different character, and adaptation builds on adaptation, builds on myth, builds on these phrases that we think are Holmes's. Elementary, my dear Watson, which never appeared in the novels, which was popularized by television and film. I mean, just the number of parodies and pastiches that there are out there, it's just amazing.
Well, I think it's like anything in pop culture. It's great that it becomes so famous that it gets misquoted almost. You know, play it again, Sam. not a quote from Casablanca. Beam Me Up, Scotty is not a quote from Star Trek. Luke, I Am Your Father is not a quote from Empire Strikes Back. It becomes so famous that people remember it wrong, but they know it. So if you like, okay, tell me what things do you think about when you think about Sherlock Holmes? They go, oh, Deerstalker, pipe, magnifying glass, which I notice he does get out in this little magnifying glass. So just look at the handle. It's not that,
Which again is wonderfully pastiched in Top Secret.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The Zucker and Abrahams film with Peter Cushing holding the magnifying glass to his eye.
And you wrote to me to mention, why did we not talk about Peter Cushing in that? Because it's a comedy performance in Top Secret. Yeah, he's in the library and they filmed the whole scene backwards, didn't they? Which is incredible, and played it forward. Yeah. So they're throwing books back onto shelves. Top Secret, if you haven't seen it, by the way, the Zucker brothers who did Airplane movies. Top Secret is a work of comedy genius. I remember you and I used to watch and quote it many, many times. But Peter Cushing, dog poop. Yeah, one photo. Pick that up. Yeah, I was. No, actually, I still think of you when I think of the Omar Sharif quote: "Souvenirs, novelties, party tricks." Yeah. So Peter Cushing has this great role as a librarian, and at one point he's holding a magnifying glass up, so his eye's massive. And then as he takes it down, he's just got a massive eye. So that's Peter Cushing. But they just orchestrated this backwards scene so brilliantly, didn't they? We've started to talk about other movies. That means that probably means it's winding down time, doesn't it?
I think we probably should. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I've certainly enjoyed having Ritchie on the show. Nice one, Ritchie.
It's been lovely to see you both again.
Well, you'll have to come back on sometime because we've got another 12, 13 plus episodes and more.
Anytime you'll have me.
All right, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your expertise and knowledge. And thanks for meeting Christopher Lee all those years ago as well.
Yeah, that was very handy.
Yeah.
So next time, we'll be looking at The Brides of Dracula, the 1960 Terence Fisher film. So until next time, beware the more in those dark hours when evil is exalted. Oh, and subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.
Bye.